Shalom, Bethel family. It is Thursday, once again, time to review our Torah talk from synagogue this past week here at Congregation Bethel. We read last week Parshat Vayera, the second part where we really read about the life of Abraham. A lot of action in this parsha, a lot going on. And it's clear what Vayera and last week Lech Lecha established is that Abraham and Sarah enjoy a very special, unusual, even unique relationship with God. But despite their obviously special relationship with God, Abraham and Sarah appear to have a pretty tough life. In the stories that we read last week, they dealt with war. They felt they needed to hide Sarah's identity, pretend that she was Abraham's sister instead of his wife because of the insecurity they felt among the people where they were living. They, at the very beginning, when God comes to them, are told they have to leave not only their land, but their family behind and go where God will tell them. And then in this week's reading, we read about how, again, Abraham feels that he needs to hide Sarah's identity as his sister. He again feels that kind of insecurity. They deal with the curse of infertility, right? The difficulty that Sarah has with having a child. Abraham is forced to choose between his wife's happiness and having his son Ishmael in the camp, and ultimately is forced to exile Ishmael and Ishmael's mother Hagar. And finally, at the end of the Parsha, we have the famous story of the binding of Isaac, where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. Now, we know that God doesn't make Abraham go through with it, but still, what a terrible and cruel test to have to take. Abraham's life is full of challenges. In fact, the rabbis teach about Abraham's 10 tests of faith. What we mean when we say a test of faith, we mean that things were difficult, and Abraham had to navigate it and still feel that closeness with God. So despite all the adversity that Abraham and Sarah end up facing, they certainly appear to find fulfillment in their lives in their special relationship with God. So the question is, what is their secret? What do they know as the first Jews that we don't? It's a poignant question, a question of the moment, because we too are living through times of great anxiety and fear. It seems like every other week there's some horrible, tragic incident in the news. Right? When I heard 2 weeks ago about a terrorist driving through a bike lane, I was shocked. I was not shocked. I was aggrieved. I was chagrined. I was even angry, but shocked. Sadly, incidents like that are not shocking anymore. Last week, when a shooter walked into a church in San Antonio, I was sickened. I was saddened, but I wasn't shocked. Not shocked any more than I was 2 weeks before when it happened in Las Vegas. Jarring, yes, the numbers are, but are any of us really surprised that these mass shootings are happening now? Or the killer storms, one after another, the flooding, the disaster, the tragedy. We're not shocked because these things seem to be happening so much. These times are indeed troubled. They're fearful. They are filled with anxiety. How do we find fulfillment and meaning in times like that? It is times like this that we seek the wisdom of our faith. It is times like this that we look to the figures of our beginnings, to Sarah and Abraham, and try to learn from them what might comfort us even these 3,500 years later. We can find one answer to that question in the reassurances that God gives to Abraham time and again. Right? There are several times in Abraham's life when he comes close to despair. Right? When his faith is wavering and he cries out to God. 2 of them were in Parsha Vayera, which we read, right? The incident of the exile of Ishmael and the incident of the binding of Isaac. In those cases, both times, Abraham fears that he won't have children, that the children he has, he's going to have to hurt. We read it last week. Also, when Abraham was lamenting the fact that he didn't have an heir, to God. In all of these cases, God comforts Abraham with the very same notion. He says to Abraham, fear not, because your offspring will be a great nation. They will number the stars in the sky and the sands of the seashore. And each time God reminds Abraham of this, Abraham is comforted. Even when God gives the promise along with the information that his offspring will be slaves in Egypt for 400 years under a genocidal regime, but assures Abraham that at some point God will take them out with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, even knowing that, Abraham is comforted. The question is, why does this make Abraham feel better? Right? Abraham is fearful now. Abraham is afraid that God is not showing him favor now. Abraham is suffering with the anxieties of childlessness or with possibly losing his children now. How does it help him to know that generations from now his people will be great nations? Why does it make him feel better to know that his children will be slaves in Egypt, even if they'll exist? But that's just it. That's what makes Abraham and Sarah as the first monotheists so special. It is why their legacy has lasted even until this day and will last for many generations beyond us. With the belief that there is only one God and that God unites us all, Abraham and Sarah discover something that was tenuous up until this moment. Right? Prior to this moment in human history, there was no guarantee of continuity through the generations. Maybe there's never a guarantee of that, but there was no tool for continuity throughout the generations. With polytheism, your children might adhere to the values and ideals that you did, or they might change and worship a different God with completely different values. Or worse, they might be conquered by another nation and then change to worship the gods of their new rulers. That's what happened up until this point. With monotheism, Abraham isn't just getting assurance that he will have descendants. He is getting an assurance that he and his offspring will always be connected through the values and the way of life granted to them by the one true indivisible God. Abraham and his offspring, even till today, even you and me, 3,700 years later, are linked through our relationship with God. Abraham is given comfort by God. It's not the comfort of children. It's the comfort of legacy. That is the gift of monotheism, the gift of this special relationship with God. It is that we share that gift throughout the generations. And it works, right? I mean, what people in history has been more picked on, conquered, exiled, pushed around, tortured, or persecuted more than the Jewish people? No one comes close. In part because no one has survived so long. Despite the persecutions and the conquests, we survive. And our progeny has remained the progeny of Abraham. God tells Abraham that with monotheism, you gain immortality. That is why he is comforted. With Judaism, you gain immortality through legacy in a way that never existed before Abraham. And why is it comforting? Because it means that even when times are bad, they shall pass, times will be good again, and our people will thrive again. And that's the reason why Judaism is so powerful and useful to us at this moment of trial and anxiety. God never guarantees Abraham that life won't have its difficulties. God promises Abraham that despite those difficulties, despite those dark moments, and they will get dark, he tells Abraham up front, there will be bad times for your children and their children and their children. But that the darkness will pass, but you and your children will remain forever because of the values and the connection that you share. Now, during these times, it's time to grasp those same values and practices that have maintained our people for millennia. They are what will shepherd us through these difficult times. We pray that we can all have that sense of legacy, all realize that the decisions we make and the values that we adhere to during this time will ultimately be our gift to those who come after us, so that we will be a link in this beautiful chain from Abraham on to our own progeny, hopefully generations and generations from now, linked by this beautiful faith and by our connection to God. We pray that that be so. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom this coming Shabbos, and look forward to speaking with you again next week.